Before us is the world's first panoramic virtual game Love in Another Universe. It became popular due to its completely new gaming device and complete interactive immersion. In this game, limitless possibilities, discoveries, and the ability to immerse ourselves in a completely different fascinating world await us. This is another universe where players are aristocrats, build estates, train troops, develop in the field of magic, science and technology, and fight demons. Most of the heroes find their love here and make a good impression on the non-player character. But, until today, not a single player has managed to defeat the witches. Many heroes are subjected to brutal torture and choose the path of retreat. Undoubtedly, the most powerful, fearsome witch of all witches is considered the mistress of desires, and her name is Lithia. The level 99 warrior, Jen, grins and catches the indestructible witch, shackling her in chains. Lithia's chain shackles crack loudly. She is unable to contain her bitterness from defeat and asks to kill her, to save her from this torment. But our character is not going to kill the witch. He has prepared a more elegant punishment for her. He longs for something else. Another was that Jen wanted to marry the terrifyingly powerful, bloodthirsty Lithia. The discouraged witch fell into a rage at such a proposal. She was angry and offended by such a ridiculous reason for defeating her. Jen did not understand the anger of his witch. He liked her, he even tried to court her. The player explained his actions, because Lithia is a witch, so he saw no other way out but to win this battle. It was humiliating for a captured witch to receive such an offer from a lesser race. Jen knew that. Then our character hugged Lithia to him. In his hands he had a bottle of thick, bright red liquid. A love potion, that was it, in a closed test tube, which was specially created for the fearsome witch of wishes. Jen took Lithia's chin with 2 fingers, opened her mouth, and a bright liquid flowed inside, forcing her to drink the elixir from the goddess of love. The liquid slowly poured over Lithia's lips and chin, and droplets of the love potion fell onto her chest. The exhausted girl sat on her knees on the floor, and a heart floated up from above. Just one heart. Jen's surprise knew no bounds, because even a goddess could not resist this potion. She fell in love right away. The bloodthirsty witch rejoiced. She is stronger. She does not need to be compared with pitiful insects, goddesses of love. She managed and did not fall in love with this young man. Lithia's joy was short-lived. Jen prepared. He took out 100 vials of bright red liquid. 99 potions remained to be used. The witch drank and drank the elixir. Sip after sip the liquid rushed inside. She had no more strength left. She was hot and hot. Finally, the goal was achieved. The entire elixir was drunk. Lithia admitted her adoration for her dear fiancé. The bride rewarded her groom with a strong, hot hug. Not a drop of the potion was left. Since the game prohibits gamers from proposing to witches, Jen gave the ring to Lithia and became her husband. The wedding took place. From that moment the witch and the warrior became officially married, and at the same time their lives, abilities and attributes were divided equally. Jen was jubilant. He became the boss here. He is now the boss, because he made the first such marriage with the terrifying witch of desires. The warrior's power has increased, he has mastered new abilities, and his resistance has become enormous. Jen moves on to the next plan. The hero made his plan to capture the girls' hearts. He wanted to capture all the witches by marrying each of them. His first witch wife was unhappy with the plan. Because he captured her, she became his. Jen did not stop there. He walked purposefully towards achieving his goal and married 8 more witches, capturing them all. Some admired the player, considering him the best who ever existed, while others harbored a grudge against him, having lost their witch. Lying on the green grass under the hot sun, Jen was waiting for the game to update in order to find himself another wife. His tenacious gaze swept over his first victory, his first wife Lithia, who was serenely sleeping next to him. The player wanted to have fun and began to sneak up on his sleeping wife. But no matter how much Jen wanted to kiss, squeeze her chest, or tumble with his own wife, nothing worked, since the game did not allow you to lower your hand below the neck of a non-player character. The player was bored. He wondered what he should do next. All the witches were defeated, and the demons surrendered. Everything in the world is calm. Having taken off his gaming glasses, the gamer again became bored. What to do now? What his future plan was, what goal to set. Lying on his bed, next to his pillow with the toy Lithia, the player made a plan to capture the goddesses. But then something strange, unexpected, and exciting happened. He was summoned. Because he had completely absorbed the powers of the witches. An invisible voice commanded the system, ordered to maintain marital contact, sacrificing itself. Rewriting history and saving the universe is the goal. Can you do it? That's the question. The main character gradually came to his senses, slowly opened his eyes, squinted, and felt dizzy. Rubbing his eyes and marveling at the soft bed, the player sought his pillow with Lithia and was delighted. Our character did not at all expect an angry call from the other half of the bed, from his wife. Jumping on the spot, the player could not resist screaming. His wife looked frightening, just like her image, tousled hair, and eyes burning with anger. The witch flew into a rage. she was called the wife of a lower race. Lithia was ready to tear the player into pieces. The witch is terrible in anger. The ball has already caught fire in her hands, ready to defeat its target. Our character could not withstand such an attack and started to run. A ball of light in Lithia's hands rushed at the intruder. Everything around sparkled in different colors. The Witch of Desires was furious that the little man had entered her bedroom without passing the guards. This had never happened before. The lady was thinking through the punishment for those who failed. The punishment for the guards would be very cruel. Then the witch saw him, from a lower race, a man. He was alive and pondering what had happened to the game. Lithia's body was engulfed in heat. It became hot, and she saw the symbol of a marriage contract with the guy who was nearby. Holding the witch's red, angry face, Jen grinned at her rebellious phase, considering her to be a restless child. Having grabbed Lithia, he decided to teach a lesson, because naughty children should be spanked. The witch cried bitterly. Even her mother had never spanked or punished her like that. The system allowed touching a non-player character, and it was strange. Lithia shouted curses and curses at Jen. The last spank was applied to the girl's bottom, all red now. Lithia could not hold back her tears. Jen wanted to quit the game. He believed that all this was a bug in the game. After rummaging through his shorts pockets, the player did not find his virtual glasses. Bringing his face closer to the witch's face, the young man was worried about the game. What happened to him? Drops of sweat appeared on his face, and he was horrified. The virtual glasses were removed. He left the game a long time ago. To confirm his guess, he lowered his hand to the NPC, his palm moving to the witch's freshly spanked bottom. The hero's eyes widened and realization appeared in them. He realized that he was completely immersed in the game. Suddenly, in the silence, for our heroes, the door handle began to shake. Someone was trying to enter the room. They broke into the room, worried. Very strange voices were heard in the mistress's chambers. A girl with green hair and small cute horns on her head flew into the room like a fury. It was Dana, Lithia's personal maid. The picture that appeared before her eyes made her scream loudly. A man was giving her mistress a foot massage. The witch was dissatisfied with the willful appearance of the maid, because she did not allow anyone to enter her bedchamber. Dana sharply lowered her head, so that her green hair covered her face in a wave. Burning with embarrassment, her pathetic attempts to justify herself to her mistress failed. With his strong hands, the player grabbed the witch's small foot, massaging and stroking, pressing on the very middle of the foot. The witch leaned back on the bed with pleasure. The maid was embarrassed by this new behavior of her mistress. Jen knows how to give a first-class massage. Lithia didn't understand what was happening, but she really liked the new sensations. She was delighted. Having heard that the end would be a breast massage, Dana was lost and, sweating through and through, tried to quickly leave the room. After our heroes were left alone in the chambers, Jen attempted to seduce the witch. Lithia quickly came to her senses after the tormenting sweet massage, and already began to feel angry again because the person was trying to touch her. The witch's attacks had no effect on the player, which made her feel annoyed. Lithia and her strong woman did not understand why she could not harm this young man. She lowered her eyes and saw a diamond ring, the basis of marriage. A sudden insight dawned on the witch. This man was chosen as the groom by none other than the mother goddess. A smug smile crossed the player's face, convincing her that he was her mother's choice. Closing his eyes, the hero began his story to the one he took as his wife, the terrifying Witch of Desires. He told her that after the battle between evil spirits and goddesses, both sides suffered greatly, and after the end of the battle they all fell into eternal sleep. But, the hero continued his speech. Before falling asleep, the evil spirits managed to marry all the available witches. I was allowed to choose the next successor among the witches. Jen finishes her story. Lithia agrees, because she is already 1,000 years old and she doesn't see anything special in marriage. The girl is glad that the hero's blow fell on her. She is sure that people and witches will fall at her feet. But Jen must inform the other witches about his mission. He is about to leave the room. He is already approaching the door, reaching for the handle when Lithia stops him. Showing her concern for the young man, Lithia worries that the messenger is not allowed to walk. She opens a portal, offers her help. She herself will be able to report and call other witches here so that they can express their opinions. They decided that Lithia would tell everyone, and the messenger would remain here in the room. She promises that she will deal with it quickly. The witch had completely different desires. She did not want to help, but for the theocracy of the mother goddess to become hers. After Lithia left, the player breathed a sigh of relief, because his wife believed in his deception. Left alone, the player couldn't believe himself that he ended up on Lithia's bed. Suddenly a voice sounded, which frightened the guy very much. The voice told him about the Witch of Wishes, that luck and deception belongs to him. It turned out to be the system that transported the hero. It should turn off now in 5 minutes, so it gave him a chance to ask questions. The gamer wanted to know how to get back home. He received an answer to his question only after the end of the game, to defeat all the witches, as in the game. The hero doubted the upcoming victory over all the witches, since he did not have enough goddesses. The system wished him luck and switched off. Before shutting down, the system managed to present a gift to the hero. She brought in a chest of personal items. The warrior rejoiced at this surprise, because in his chest there were many world-class things, necessary and important, and now he had to choose his outfit. In his things, he saw Lithia's ring, a prop, a jade ring of the Goblin King, which was made for a groom who had married someone else by deception. Her name was Sarah. She made me a ring, but there was only a slight connection between us, and I did not want to marry her. Biting his nails, Jen was glad that he had not had time to have an affair with all the gods, otherwise, a bloody, terrible and long war would begin, and all because of him. The player is worried about his safety, about his life. He urgently needs to level up. At the same time, Lithia emerged from her magical portal into the second floor of the palace. Here she met someone she had not seen for a long time, the Queen of the Elves, Sarah. Due to the fact that Jen had annoyed the elf princess, she was no longer queen, which she told Lithia. Sarah, hearing the name of the man who betrayed her, flared up and did not want to hear the story about Jen. The bloodthirsty, most powerful witch gave an assignment to a girl who was very good at such things. The assignment was to find all the information available about the owner of the hair, and the more information she could find, the better. Sarah took the hair and peered for a long time, reading the information. Finally she shared that she was male, 19 years old, and there was nothing special about him, an ordinary person. Lithia let out a roar. She realized that the little man had lied. Her great witch had been deceived by a simple man. Sarah supplemented her words with strange information. There are many witches hovering around a person's aura. Various witches, the witch of betrayal, the witch of the underworld, the witch of honor, very, very many. All this is impossible to sum up the princess of the elves. This little man really turned out to be a messenger from his mother. Only for Lithia it was strange that he turned out to be a simple person for such an important mission. She, without wasting time, called her servant, an assistant, who was always next to her, protecting and guarding her, the Evil Eye. Sith, the most powerful box of the Evil Eye demon, was always at the service of his mistress, the guardian of the first level of the Palace of the Witch of Desires, turning the townspeople into stone. The task that Lithia gave to Sita was to kill Jen, a messenger from her mother. The tiny guard should not cause any harm to the little man if he turned out to be right. At the same time, Jen howled in despair. His level was insufficient and he could only dress in something fashionable. The ban did not apply to the wedding ring. The hero tried on all the rings on his hand, laughed at such a joke of the system and proclaimed himself the Lord of the Rings. But he quickly became furious that the ring turned out to be useless garbage, and is used to piss off newbies. Clutching his hair, Jen furiously swore at the system, which turned off after 5 minutes. Unnoticed by the warrior, Sith was creeping up to him, angry that this young man had allowed too much to sit in the mistress's chamber. The demon would not allow this anymore, he would kill the man. Jen, who knew nothing of what was going on behind his back, turned to the system, appealing to it in the hope of help. Sith began to sweat. Jen knows about his presence here, next to him, he even knows his name. The demon was scared. The hero found out about his weakness. He deliberately teases him, the guardian of the mistress, calling him to come out and not hide. The enemy saw the great emptiness of Sith. There is no point in hiding, you can't look at this guy anymore. Sita and Jen got to know each other better. The demon showed his true abilities, his true appearance. The player saw the Evil Eye, the demon king Sith, guarding the doors of Lithia, and did not understand where he came from. The guardian of the Great Witch of Desires rushed at the frightened Jen, wanting to kill him so that he would disappear. No one expected that a random item from Jen's personal chest would help him. The warrior accidentally stumbled upon an obstacle with his foot and slipped away from the demon's blow. Fairly exhausted, Jen himself did not understand that luck was on his side today. He dodged and the egg helped him, and grinned. The player was in unbearable pain, but he sat down, not showing that he was in pain. But the demon was surprised that the young man did not experience anything. A question was reflected on his face. Items from his personal chest were thrown away. World-class attributes lay idle. Sith, discouraged by this action, considered his attack weak and meaningless. He did not enjoy any respect or attention, and was tormented by the tormenting thoughts of the great guardian, the king of demons. All the lives of Sith would not be enough to defeat the player. It was terrible. He was weak in front of a person. The demon asked the warrior for forgiveness. It was not his fault in the attack. He only obeyed the will of Lithia, who wanted to get to know him better. Then he said goodbye and wished to have a good rest, and disappeared. Almost died, Jen exhaled. He needs to confirm the marriage contract with the witch, thereby dividing his abilities, otherwise he will soon be killed. Night, palace, only on the bed in complete silence the snoring of a man can be heard. Inaudibly, a figure from the darkness floated up to the sleeping man. The guy was strong. The figure extended his hand to Jen, Lithia, and it was she, wanted to check if the man was so strong. A sharp swing, the hand in a steel grip, not moving, not tearing Lithia's hand out of the trap. The character instantly found himself on top of the witch, and it seemed to Jen that Lithia was thirsty for his body. The seductive whisper of the warrior tempted the witch. If they become one, the girl will gain the power of an evil deity and become a real goddess. The witch blushed. She wanted power, she wanted to own, she wanted the theocracy of the mother goddess. Jen towered over his wife, unable to take his eyes off her beauty. Things were bad. Lithia looked sweet, the shy face of the majestic which took away all the player's control. The gamer's hand slid along the girl's slender legs, higher and higher, but the witch stopped the man's actions. In Jen's hand there was a bunch of rings, but he singled out one, the ring that the mother goddess gave to enter into a marriage alliance with the witch, after which the power will pass to you. The young man admitted that he was in love at first sight. The player wanted to marry only the witch, but she doubted it, because they knew each other so little. The gamer appreciated the idea of getting closer and suggested getting closer right now and doing it as deeply as possible. In matters of love, the witch surrendered to the mercy of the winner. He did a great job of getting Lithia into his network. Jen could barely restrain himself. A little more and the contract was almost sealed, the last push, and he would share his life with his little wife. Suddenly their privacy was interrupted. The mistress's personal maid burst into the room and, unable to stay on her feet, fell down. The couple pulled away from each other, blushing. They did not raise their eyes. Dana pretended that she did not see anything, covering her eyes with her hands. Lithia was embarrassed and angry. She had already warned the maid more than once that she couldn't easily get into the room, only with her permission. The girl with the horns shook her hands in fear, justifying that she had come here to make a milk bath according to the instructions. With this guy, Lithia is not in such a relationship as to sleep. Dana misunderstood everything. The witch shouted, asking to be heard carefully. Today is cold. It is very important to warm the bed before going to bed, and it is precisely to warm her body while she sleeps. Jen intervened in a quarrel between the witch and the maid. This is just help. I won't need a milk bath today, Lithia summed up, but Dana was confused. After the personal maid understood everything, she left, slamming the door behind her. Let the mistress rest. A pentagram is drawn on the door. The door is sealed so that no one else can enter the bedchamber without Lithia's permission. Jen wanted a continuation, but the witch did not promise anything. She wants to start with a relationship of simple lovers, from the very beginning. Turning towards the player, the girl saw feathers on her bare muscular chest, half-lowered shorts, and a seductive pose. The witch became embarrassed and did not know what Jen was doing. My little wife is worthy of the title of the most powerful witch. She was bathing in a milk bath. I must not be left behind, muttered Jen, smiling. Lowering her head, Lithia said that a clan of cows produces magical milk. Her maid is from this clan. So, thanks to this milk, you can become anyone, change your race and become a panda. Jen was shocked, because it's hard to become a humanoid creature. The cunning witch hugged the warrior, ran her fingers over his face, whispering in his ear, role-playing games, you can turn from a woman into a man and vice versa. Jen was excited. He managed to fantasize. Lithia was angry. The player shouted about envy and what could be done with the breast milk of cows. Poor Lithia shrank from such a cry and tried to justify herself by saying that it was a supplement. Jen never found out what this supplement was for. If the secret was revealed, a war would break out between the witches. The gamer's eyes sparkled. He realized that if there was an effect, then his target would be the mistress's personal maid, Dana. He headed towards the bed. It was already time to sleep. He didn't want to do anything. He set himself another goal, to which Lithia was indignant that the man wanted to sleep in her room. The envoy of the mother goddess must carefully monitor everything himself. The check will last 24 hours and the witch will have to endure for the sake of the theocracy, said Jen. For the sake of even greater power, the Witch of Wishes was ready to endure and agreed with the player. The round-faced moon was one witness to the giggles, whispers, and sharing of halves of the bed that night. The line was not crossed. A couple of girls and boys slept sweetly on opposite sides of each other. Nothing and no one seemed to be able to disturb their sleep. It seemed that nothing could disturb the kingdom of sleep. Only Jen was not sleeping. The thought of how to connect himself and the witch was beating in his head. He needed to take her today. In a dream, Lithia said a name, his name, swearing Jen did not understand how his little wife knew his name. Having fully woken up, the player glanced sideways at Lithia. Did she recognize who he was or whether the man still doubted it? But Lithia was not asleep, as it might seem at first glance. She asked the guy about a man named Jen, lying with their backs to each other. They had a conversation. The man asked to tell about this guy, Jen. Lithia said that Jen trampled the hearts of the girls, caused a lot of trouble to the goddesses, although she did not know all the details, but considered him bad. The witch considered him a messenger from the mother goddess and was sure that since he was an apostle, he must have known something about this. Since the mother goddess fell asleep, the witch began sadly, the world has undergone changes, a lot of scoundrels and apostles appeared who did what they themselves wanted, then this Jen appeared. there were just too many apostles. Lithia delved into memories. The goddess from the earth called upon the divine apostles. There were many of them. They appeared out of nowhere, weak, small, but insidious and sinister, and most importantly, they could be resurrected in an infinite number. The apostles died. No matter how many times it happened, everything was repeated again and again. The gamer jumped up. He realized that the apostles could be players. He was interested in what was happening now. They were also fighting with them. Lithia sat up in bed, her gaze directed forward. She could not answer what happened to the apostles. They simply disappeared, and all the witches lost their memory. Jen listened to the witch with bated breath. It was very scary, but the goddesses remember memories, Lithia answered, and they know Jen's name. It turned out that not only witches, but also people were looking for him. Apparently what the player did in the game happened in reality. The player was glad that he had been sweating over his epic equipment for a long time. Fortunately, his face was not visible. There was a big reward for him. The announcement said that you should not approach him under any circumstances. He is suspected of collaborating with demons. Having examined the search with his face, Jen sat very quietly and listened to Lithia, who guessed what he had done, played with the goddesses and abandoned everyone. That night, not only our couple could not sleep, the Witch of the Moon was listening to Dana. The maid was talking about the opportunity to gain strength. We only need a messenger from the Mother Goddess. The Witch of Fate was also notified on this quiet and peaceful night, for which she was grateful for the news. While the moon was shining with its cold, unapproachable light, news about the messenger spread quickly, and the Witch of Treason also found out about him. The Witch of Honor proudly and stately went to the Witch of Desires, but she left the castle under her guard. Jen slept in bed, completely unaware of what would happen now, and what reason he had become for the battle of all the witches for power. Lithia, biting the tip of her tongue, was deciding what to do with this guy, and the decision came to her on that still good night. The fight for Jen's holy grail will soon begin, the most bloodthirsty which anticipated. Morning came, water filled the pool, the steam rose higher and higher, nothing could be seen through it. The pampered girl stretched. The best thing to do in the morning was to take a bath. She melted from the hot water, enjoyed the moment. Taking a bath on such a refreshing morning is the highest pleasure. The girl with horns on her head confirmed the words. She noticed that they were not taking the bath alone. A worm had made its way to them. This worm was Jen, and he went to heaven. Hot water and steam made his body softer. He was happy when relaxed. An argument ensued between the girls. Lithia did not keep her promise that there would be no men in the city, because, as the girl with the horns said, men are the most insignificant and most shameless creatures. The girl with horns was deceived by a man, Jen thought, who managed to offend such a beauty. He will help deal with him if he ever meets him. Worm, that's what the demon called the man, talks too much, turned in his direction. The voice seemed familiar to the demon. She headed towards the player. Jen tried to remember the beauty from where he knew her, but it didn't work. Then the gamer asked the system to open the game panel for him, and what he saw definitely amazed him. He saw Sarah, a demoness of the Dark Elves, subordinate to Lithia. It was because of him that the good goddess of the elves fell to a demon. Jen was to blame for what happened. The demoness approached the player, leaned towards his face, and clarified that she had seen him somewhere, to which Jen shouted about his arrival only yesterday. Lithia saved the situation. She waved her hands at Sarah and called her over to talk. Jen exhaled. It's good that he rarely showed up in the game and the former goddess didn't recognize him, otherwise they would have killed him. The witch whispered hotly in Sarah's ear. The last check of the man did not show anything, so today he is here with them. We need to check him again, maybe something has appeared. Jen noticed the beauties whispering among themselves and considered it wrong. They were discussing something or someone. With sly smiles, the girls turned towards the guy. They were clearly planning something. Sarah whispered something under her breath in an unfamiliar language. A few words were enough. It was the Elvish language. A huge figure appeared behind Jen's back, increasing in size. The player froze and did not move, feeling that there was something behind him. An evil climbing vine appeared unexpectedly and quickly, sticking out its tongue, reaching out to the man, intending to eat him. Jen began to run screaming. The monster reached for the towel that was held on the young man's hips. Running away from the plant, he shouted to leave him alone. Sticking out its tongue, the multicolored plant suddenly stopped. Jen turned around and stared at his pursuer in the same way. The momentary pause aroused the girls' interest. They opened their mouths. There was no command to stop. They were at a loss as to what had happened. The long branches of the plant did not reach out to Jen at all, as the demon wanted. The plants reached out to her, wrapping around her body, squeezing her tighter, screamed. For some reason the plant attacked its owner. The loach attacked Sarah, all because of the player's wedding ring, and considered Jen an enemy. Looking at all this, this is all the jade ring of the Goblin King, which the former goddess made for her beloved, but he tricked another into marrying him, and the goddess remained deceived. The ring protected the player. Instead of the girl, he would now be hanging in the air. If Sarah dared to attack me, then she understood everything. It's time to punish her, the warrior voiced his thoughts, smiling to himself. It was uncomfortable for the girl to hang in the air, especially since the plant's tongue and its leaves began to move. The tongue licked her cheek, leaving a wet trail of saliva. There was no free space left where the plant could not reach with its leaves. It completely tasted the girl, tickled her foot, the demoness begged. Sarah began to laugh from the tickling of the leaves, but when the twig dived under the edge of the towel on her chest, she screamed that she didn't need to go there. The demoness laughed, she was ticklish, she begged for mercy. This punishment was worthy, and if this continued, the girl could not stand it any longer. She turned to her highness with a cry for help. The witch could not help. The plant that the demoness summoned was terribly disgusting. The mistress did not want to touch it. The witch asked the messenger of the mother goddess to be more restrained when using the divine scattering ray. The former goddess, freed from the branches of her plant, began to fall down. The branches were cut and fell along with Sarah. A blush appeared on Jen's cheeks. Lithia's attitude was not clear to him, jealousy or something else. The girls talked. They came to the conclusion that the young man in front of them was not quite an ordinary person, since the demoness Loach was taken under his control. Sarah blushed to the tips of her ears. A pervert, although not a human man, were the girl's words. Jen was indignant, because the demoness was the first to attack him, testing his strength. Did she want to once again verify his true strength? He asked a question. The girl with the horns, angry at the man's question, rushed towards him, but the witch grabbed her by the waist and held her in place. Unexpectedly for all the characters, a voice was heard outside the door, which notified Sarah of the arrival of a subordinate with her order. The demoness found out the result. In the palace on the second floor they sell slaves. Subordinate to the witch of slavery, she sells human slaves. Sarah reproached herself that such things still continued to happen, to which Lithia assured that there was no fault. The insignificant witch of slavery was to blame for everything. A fire flared up in Lithia's eyes. She was upset by this information, folded her arms over her chest and opened her mouth. The witch went to the second floor of the palace, taking Jen with her. The guy didn't want to go anywhere. Why was he needed there? He asked. Throwing her arms to the sides, Lithia shouted that the guy would conduct an investigation for her and, by the way, he would see how the queen destroys small bugs. And they all moved behind the terrifying witch at the head. Jen and Sarah trailed behind the resilient mistress, who decided to teach a lesson to the worms on her territory. Lithia Palace has 6 floors. Each floor hides many villages and towns, small countries. Each floor is ruled by a demon. The palace is an impregnable fortress, and it's not so easy to get into. Thanks to Lithia's absolute control over the demons of each floor, the countries are thriving. Always where there is light and darkness, even though the witch abolished slavery, the slave traders still continue their work. The more dazzling the light, the more terrible the darkness. Hundreds of thousands of people behind bars, exhausted, crying out for help. In front of us is a city on the second floor of the Lithia Palace. Common tranquility is in the air. Residents are leisurely going about their business. 3 figures in black cloaks slowly follow each other. Jen cannot resist and stops the little wife. A sharp turn and the player embarrassed Sarah. Why she was looking at him all the time. Lithia interjected, saying that the demoness hated all men without exception. Jen was sure that this was because of him, because of his action. The gamer grabs the witch. He has no abilities, he must grab his wife's thigh. Standing next to her wife, they hit the road. It's safer with a woman next to her. Sarah is convinced that men are of no use. The former goddess watches the couple. She doesn't like the look of the guy. It's familiar, he can deceive Lithia, and he also constantly annoys her. Sarah pushed Jen away. Her mistress should behave more restrained. Here she is incognito. The guy tried to be indignant, did not want to be separated from the witch. But the demoness covered the man's mouth with her hand. No loud words. There's no point in calling her majesty here. Suddenly a hand appeared in the air, waving and regretting that everyone had to wait. The greeting was loud. The hand belonged to a small blue creature in a white turban. He praised the witch of slavery and opened a lot for the sale of slaves to the hillbillies. Unhappy, in rags instead of clothes, women and men, children, huddled together. They were trembling, they were pulled down by heavy shackles, frightened, they did not know what awaited them in the future. They laughed at the slaves, grinned viciously, shouting over each other. Someone asked to leave these unfortunates for food. Someone hunted the tender body. Among them was a girl. She clung to her mother. Tears flowed down her cheeks. The mother calmed her child, asking the goddess for help. A loud voice was heard. There was a lot of goods. Everyone looked back at the speaker, froze, no movement. There was a clink of coins. An iron hand poured out gold coins. They fell clattering, shimmering with their color. The mechanical duke, the demon of machines, generated by human fear of the development of magical technology, will take away everything today. They recognized him. A whisper went through everyone. Everyone was afraid of him, knowing his terrifying essence. The slave trader was happy. The goods were packed. The Iron Duke celebrated the anniversary and others were invited to his celebration. The machine demon will put people in the hunting grounds and announce a hunt for them. Such fun awaits the guests. Hearing this, people screamed, began to panic in fear, tears rolled from their eyes, children sobbed loudly in the arms of their mothers. The Duke wanted to inspect the slaves to see if they were all of good quality, so that there would be no disappointment. Tears rolled in large droplets from the girl's eyes. She prayed, cried out to the mother goddess, and asked for help. 3 people in raincoats stopped near an inconspicuous house. All operations take place in the basement. Sarah muttered reliable information. Jen received an offer. The girls arrived. It won't be long before he can recover from what he saw, he thought. The product was presented. The girls sat with their heads down and resigned to their fate. During the game, you miss a lot, the player thought. Jen clenched his fist forcefully, barely restraining himself. Nothing changed when he came into this world. The little blue creature carried out the girl. The girl was cut up by the mechanical Duke. Without a sound, the girl was gone. The trio froze. They saw how they threw a girl with blue pigtails out of the basement. All her clothes were covered in blood. A barely audible sigh was heard from her side. The girl tried to raise her head. A cry of pain froze on her lips. The human slave was still alive. Lithia issued an order. It was necessary to heal her. The subordinate obeyed. Sarah approached the child. A green ball flew off her hand. Treatment was taking place. Lithia and Jen were watching the process. The player was amazed. He considered the witch an absolute evil, but now she revealed a new side to him, took pity on the man. Looking after the terrifying witch of desires, the gamer doubted that she was evil. A thin hand grabbed the sharp toe of the shoe, begging to be saved. Hope was the last to die. The girl raised her dirty, tear-stained face, reached out to the witch. A request for the salvation of her relatives, the villagers, fell from her broken lips. With a quiet groan, Lithia knelt down in front of the girl. Hearing her request, the witch reminded who she was and that she was a villain. You have to pay for the help of a demon. The person knew about this and was ready to do anything for a weak opportunity to do something. The exhausted girl fell. Lithia left. The contract with the Witch of Desire was concluded. The witch is confident in her abilities. There was a fire in her eyes. She walked towards her victory. Now the matter is left to her. The bloody sword was not put away. Everything was not enough for the Duke. He tried everything and tried his product. The slave trader and everyone present were horrified by the actions of the demon. No one could deal with him on this floor except the manager. A woman's voice is heard from the door. It's not a matter of arranging your own order. 3 people entered the room. All 3 could barely contain their anger. Lithia's eyes were burning with red fire, ready to tear everyone to pieces. Caught with the loot, are you ready to pay the price? Lithia asked. She was calm and behaved with dignity. The Duke did not immediately understand that the address was addressed to him, calling the unexpected guests curious mice. In the system, the demon could not read the data about these people. This was quite strange for him. Jen was delighted with the Duke. It takes 2 human lords to defeat him, but also scared because he could die by his hand. The Duke's sword flashed threateningly. It is aimed at our heroes. They chose the wrong day to visit. The demon is not in the mood. The demon of machines is looking for slaves for game. His search has not stopped. He does not need people who are weak and helpless. The former goddess is terrible in anger. Her hair is flying. Her eyes are covered with a veil. She screams furiously. Releasing his plant, the loach attacked the Iron Duke, destroying everything in its path. The green loach with its branches buried the house into ruins, destroyed everything, burying everyone in this place. The machine demon fell on his face. He lost in this battle. All his pomposity evaporated without a trace. The Witch of Desires is majestic in her true form. She advances on her enemies. They do not have such a right to trade people on her territory. Only after his defeat did the Duke recognize the oppressive power of Her Highness, and only understand who had defeated him. The burning gaze, compressed lips, the Duke saw it all. Before him the mistress, Lithia herself. A girl with blue hair ran up to her mother, worried about them, whether everything was okay. A bunch of people were confused. They didn't understand what happened. The mother hugs the child. With tears in her eyes she thanks the goddess for her help. Sarah goes to her loach, but upon hearing gratitude, she turns to the woman and replies that there are no goddesses here. Residents of the city are happy to see their queen. They thanked Lithia, bowing their heads. There was sincere joy on their faces. Turning to her people, the witch persuaded the guilty. She came here to deal with the criminals. Sarah and Lithia decided what they had violated and what punishment they should choose. Rudeness and disrespect for the laws were unforgivable. It was decided to apply the death penalty. A small blue creature in a turban fell to his knees and asks Lithia for his life and to remember his reputation. The witch shouts out a death wish, a caustic word, and hits her target. A huge paw with many eyes and a toothy mouth appears behind the slave trader's back. The wish is fulfilled. A clawed hand lifts the blue creature, its mouth open in a silent scream. The Iron Duke sees what awaits him. The empty creature is thrown down, hunched over. The witch has taken away the will to live. Lithia holds the blue creature's desire on her finger, pointing at the Duke. Now it's his turn, she will taste the machine demon's desire. Twisted into a spiral, the Iron Duke understands that death will not escape him. Horror seizes him, but the funnel twists more and more. The demon of machines did not want to die. He asks Lithia to take pity and offers $1 million for her life. But the girl doesn't care anymore. She controls the funnel of death with her hand. The death of the Iron Duke is of greater value to the Witch of Desires than his life. Her Highness is adamant. Clenching his fists, the demon held on to the last. The iron became covered in cracks, clenching to the end. There was an explosion, where before there was a crater, there was now a red haze. There was no longer an Iron Duke. Lithia folded her hands on her chest and looked pleased. Turning around her face, which had a wide smile on it, she boasted about how cool she was. Not finding the one to whom the witch was addressing, she was surprised by his absence and looked around with her eyes in search of Jen. Behind Lithia, a hand appeared from under the rubble of iron. She waved in search of help. The player crawled out from under the former machine demon, indignant that Sarah did not warn him, and if there had not been a jade ring, he would have been dead. Jen finally stood firmly on the ground, was glad that he was lucky and nothing was a hindrance for him. He did not notice the shell flying straight at him. Lithia turned around at the noise and scream. She saw the messenger lying on the ground, and on top was a bag with something valuable. Blood pooled in the corner of Jen's lips. He was crushed by a bag. It was money, 1 million. In the fading gaze the player saw the girls, Sarah with green fire in her hand and Lithia. The eyes closed, the girls became blurry, the eyelids became heavy and darkness fell. Before us is an elven temple. 1,000 years ago, peace and tranquility in every movement of a tree leaf. A handsome, stately young man in knightly armor with bright red flowers in his hands proposes to her highness to become his wife. The girl sits on the throne, next to her guard. With downcast eyes she turns to the warrior with praises of courage. Her chosen one must prove himself. The beautiful goddess with a burning gaze, trusted by all the elves, gives the order to bring her the doomsday silver, the cold iron of the river of infinity and the sacred crystal of the rainbow dragon, 9,999 pieces each. The warrior, drenched in cold sweat, screams, "Such a task is impossible, it will take several months." The appearance of a player in red armor takes the warrior by surprise, and his words about weakness cause anger. Den has already completed the mission, so his speech was arrogant. He asks the jade to make wedding rings. Surprised by the words, the goddess does not believe that the messenger wants to marry her, and jade is the greatest asset of her people, and she does not want to give it away. Jen flatteringly spoke about his love and the fact that he could not cope with his feelings, which had gone beyond the limit. Taking step by step towards the goddess, the player echoed her about his love, which he fell in love with, seducing the girl with his words. Her highness had strong doubts. She liked to hear such pleasant words. The warrior spoke about love, about his feelings. It seemed sincerely that he would carry them until his old age, protecting and preserving them, if only Sarah would give her consent. The cry made the couple forget and look at what was happening. It was Lewis who could not bear such lofty words and realized that he had the soul of a fragile girl. Blush appeared on her highness's cheeks. She pressed her hand to her cheek, and love flashed in her eyes. Holding her head, the goddess thought about what to do, because the marriage was not equal, but the guard assured that no one would be against this marriage. The girl's eyes showed a slight sadness. She fell in love with the messenger. On the same day, the warrior entered where the slave traders were trading and saved the people, so there were no people left against his marriage and the goddess. Sarah made a jade ring once in her life, handed it over and waited for her lover to put it on her. The moon poured a bright light on the dark night. The two sat and looked at the sky. The goddess knew that the player had a nickname and she asked him to give his real name. The warrior turned around and said that Jen was his real name. A lonely bride stood in a beautiful white dress. Her groom was missing. They couldn't find him. He was nowhere to be found. The subordinates were worried about the mistress. The girl was leaving. They tried to stop her, to find out where she was going. Sarah cried with bitter tears. Her fiancé left, taking the ring with him. Then she was consumed by hatred. The subjects shielded themselves from the bright blue light that surrounded the unfortunate woman. Pain and anger were now her companions. Clenching her teeth in bitterness, the goddess vowed to take revenge on the one who betrayed her. The subjects were horrified. Their beautiful goddess fell, and no one could come to their senses from the deception. Emptiness now shone in the girl's once pure eyes, and she screamed Jen's name with all her might. The goddess lost her power due to this situation, and she became Lithia's subordinate in order to find her ex-fiancé. Emerging from the memories of her past life, Sarah was glad that now she is smarter and reacts differently to the cunning of men. A demoness walked along a long corridor. Two maids said that Lithia was waiting for her in her room. The girl promised that she would reveal the truth about the witch's boyfriend. Sarah opened the door, entered the room, and confirmed that she was present as requested. Delighted, Lithia moved towards the demoness. She had a request. The guy lay with his eyes closed. His head was on the pillow. He insisted that the witch's kiss would immediately make him feel better. Jen was lying on the bed. Lithia lowered her gaze, and only Sarah did not succumb to the guy's tricks. She saw through him and urged the mistress not to believe him. The mention of the goblin's kiss quickly brought the player to his senses. He jumped up on the bed, holding the blanket with both hands. Sarah smiled and looked at Jen. He reproached himself for not being able to kiss the witch. Turning away from the guy, the witch closed her eyes. She had no time for games. She was late for a tea party with the witches. Jen became interested in this ceremony. All the witches with cups sat at a large round table. They gathered to make important decisions. Jen's eyes lit up. He wanted to get information from the witches, a good opportunity. The guy jumped out of bed, asking Lithia to take him with her. The witch turned to him, perplexed. Sarah stopped the young man. It's not so easy to get to a witch's tea party, even if you are the messenger of the mother goddess. Lithia confirmed the demon's words. She didn't want her to have competitors. The others shouldn't find out about the messenger. The witch walked towards the player, who jumped up, waving his hands away from the witch. Sarah watched from the sidelines at everything that was happening. The former goddess did not like Jen, and hearing his sweet talk, she wanted to tear out his tongue. Lithia looks at the small watch in her hand. She is late, pushes the player away from her and is in a hurry to run to the meeting. Folded hands, dissatisfied face, Sarah's whole pose screams of unwillingness to follow the gamer. Jen himself is dissatisfied. He does not want to stay with the demoness, but Lithia is adamant. Someone must watch him. The player took the witch's fingers in his hands. In a gentle voice he began to tell her about the importance in his life, about his feelings, and repeated all the words he had said earlier to another girl. As soon as the words were spoken, the former goddess's eyes opened wide, realization slowly creeping up on her. Immediately, the image of a warrior in armor, her lover, appeared, and tears rolled down from the girl's eyes. The memory was too painful. The witch noticed Sarah's tears. She began to calm her down. She thought that it was because of looking after the young man, but the demon denied the words. Another reason was Jen. Lithia was leaving. Sarah would look after Jen. He couldn't escape. It was over. The lights in the demoness' eyes flared up more and more. She would look after the man and at the same time check him. Lithia winks at the young man. Her cloak flutters. She stands in front of the portal, asking the messenger not to be bored without her. Jen tried to stop the witch, extended his hand to her, but only he and the demoness remained in the room. The player sat down on the bed, folded his hands on his knees, and the girl stepped towards him. Sarah was wrapping a vine with thorns around her hand. She had prepared questions. It would be more gentle, although her favorite pastime was interrogation with torture. And the girl with a whip in her hand walked towards the man, questions flying from her about age, gender, name. Sarah moved very close to Jen as he pulled out a ring from behind his back, an attribute he can use. The whip flew through the air towards the young man. The demoness would make him experience pain for truthful answers. The whip fell onto the void. There was no one on the bed anymore. This triggered the ring and transported the player to his partner. Steam was coming from the bed. The whip cut the blanket. The demoness was surprised at such a transfer. Sarah turned around and saw Jen flying at her from the blue portal with her arms outstretched. The player knocked the demoness down, buried himself directly in her magnificent chest. The whip in the girl's hands fell out. She clenched her teeth in pain. The former goddess was angry. She did not feel such anger. Taking the guy by the face, she was going to kill him. The girl was sitting in a chair. Her slender legs were crossed. Thinking about the hero's name, she realized that it was not real. The beautiful demoness sat on a throne of leaves and branches. Her hands were gathered together. She questioned the young man, urging him to tell her the truth. Jen sat on the bed. He answered Sarah's questions, while trying to deceive her. The demoness is not so easy to deceive. She saw through Jen. Her strength opened up behind her. Closing her eyes, she prepared to attack. The whole room sparkled and sparkled. Sarah called upon the power, forcing the young man to burst into tears and cover his face from the bright light. Jen found himself in a spacious, bright room, where there was a table and a bouquet of red flowers. The room was overgrown with leaves and branches, which made it seem abandoned. Sarah fell on the guy, the floor broke, and the young man tried to climb the pole. The former goddess recognized him. Now Jen had no choice but to confess and blame mental anguish for his crime. Sarah ran after the traitor with a sharp sword, tried to catch up with him and take revenge. A wave of light throws the demoness away from the young man. He put the ring forward to escape. Lost in thought, Jen takes off his jade goblin ring and hands it to the girl, thereby wanting to prove that he did not want to cause her much pain. Sarah didn't even think about stopping. She wouldn't believe the deception again. She rushes like an angry fury towards the young man, but he doesn't run away. He goes to meet her. The sword of the former goddess overtakes its traitor, pierces him through. Blood flows down the young man's t-shirt. Jen hugs the girl. Blood flows from his mouth. He asks for her forgiveness. In the man's arms, Sarah can't hold back her sobs, tears streaming down her cheeks. The demoness raises her bloody hands and looks at them, her white robe also stained. Placing her hands on Jen's wound, Sarah tries to save him, calling on her magic, green saving light sparkling through his veins. Opening his eyes slightly, the young man tries to smile through clenched teeth. He made the right bet. In the silence, the sound of a slap in the face is heard. Air escapes with a whistle from the hero's mouth. Sarah sat on her knees in front of him, her hand raised to strike, swearing at the man. Jen was surprised at her mood swings. With her hands folded on her chest, the girl gives him the opportunity to explain himself and is ready to listen to his opinion. With an open and honest face, the young man began to talk to Sarah about divine destiny and the destruction of everything. A small and bright figure, surrounded by little men, descended from heaven. This is the goddess of the creation of the world and the culprit of everything. The warrior watched over his beautiful city. For the sake of salvation, he was ready to sacrifice a lot. Having blurted out everything, Jen began to wait for a decision from the demoness. He could not fail the mission, he needed to marry Lithia. Sarah lowered her head, sighed sadly. Her pose did not change. She was sad that the young man was marrying someone else. Standing opposite each other, Jen assured that he sincerely loved only one beautiful girl, her. Unable to restrain herself, Sarah cups the guy's face and kisses him. The kiss was full of love, making him blush. The embarrassed, satisfied girl promised to wait until the end of Jen's mission to be together. Sarah looks back, sees a fireball, a portal opens, shining with a bright light. There is an explosion, everything around is in smoke. The demoness is looking with her eyes, her figure turned to the entrance. Lithia raises her index finger and calls the guy's real name, but burns with righteous anger. The witch touches Sarah on the shoulder, asks her a tricky question, but does not have time to answer. She is perspiring. Jen saves the situation. The girls turn in his direction. The young man assures the witch that she misunderstood everything, and he helped the demon, pulled out the fly from his eye. Throwing out his hands, the young man asks Lithia not to use magic. He is again left without clothes. The three figures froze, looking at each other, each thinking about their own, thinking through their further actions. The delighted witch cheerfully pats the former goddess and praises her for her idea with the space of the kingdom of the gods. Again the three freeze, but now Sarah restores the room. She claps her hands and a green light sparkles. Returning back to her chambers, the witch reprimands Jenna about marriage, and all women. Our heroes are drawn to the light from the portal and a voice is heard asking Lithia about her upcoming marriage. The witch runs up to the portal, tries to push the uninvited guest with both hands. While she succeeds, Jen watches this performance and recognizes the voice, having heard it several times before. The guy flies down. He was pushed by Lithia to take a walk with Sarah. His mouth is open in a scream. Without ceasing to scream he falls. Remaining calm, the demoness waits for orders, and she receives them, not to return until the mistress calls. Gray bulky stones, lightning cuts the sky, small stones underfoot begin to glow. An empty skull of some creature lies on the sand, the lizard begins to move, and a funnel appears in the dark sky from above, growing larger. This is a portal. A player flies out of it with his arms outstretched, his mouth open in a scream. The ground is getting closer. Jen flies vertically down, does not hit her face while falling, continues to curse, and closes her eyes. A high-heeled foot lands on the young man's bare stomach, and air escapes through his mouth from the impact. Sarah leans over the player, clasping her hand over his mouth. She worries about him, but he raises his voice, which means everything is fine. The heroes looked around the place where they found themselves. It was the magical space of the Midnight Witch. When the goddesses fell asleep in eternal sleep, the witches began to seize territories. Ordinary people had nowhere to hide, they fled in fear. Jen was scared. He immediately thought about his lands. He wanted to see how they were without him. The girl looked into the distance. She was sorry, but the lands and people of the warrior also suffered. Glowing pillars from the settlements meant a fall, and the land of Jenna was no exception. The couple looked at the domed cities. Cities, villages and even capitals are closed by the light of pillars. Residents have long lost hope of salvation. They have been locked for 1,000 years. Here is a warrior in red armor sitting with a resident of his village over a glass of beer, a maid serving foamy beer with a smile on her face. The memory changed. Now he was fighting with swords with a girl. This is his comrade. Here is a warrior resting his fist on his cheek out of boredom. He is with scientists. They all died trying to resist the monopoly of the aristocrats. The player quickly came to his senses, put his hand on Sarah's shoulder, and accepted her support. The guy looked at the pillars. The demoness looked at him. There were no lands. He would win them back. Their path lay in the lands of Jen. Hot water was flowing in Lithia's bathroom. Steam was coming from it. It was hot from the water. A young girl with 2 large pigtails was basking in the bathtub. Water was flowing down her leg. She was happy. She asked the witch about a servant from the Dairy clan. Lithia did not allow Susan, a girl with pigtails, to use the milk bath, convincing her that it was unnecessary. As a result, the Witch of Desires gave in under the pressure of the Witch of Midnight. She went after her maid Dana. After Lithia left, Susan grinned maliciously, hiding her eyes under her bangs. She guessed that the witch had hidden the messenger of the Mother Goddess. Biting her tongue, clasping her hands together, the Witch of Midnight decided to wait for the maid and ask her where her future husband was. Sarah touched the barrier, her fingers burned, the wall was too strong for them to pass. But Jen had a special accessory in store, a legendary pass to the ground. It would help him overcome the obstacle. The demoness was surprised. She did not expect to see a pass to the ground. It was not easy to get. The former goddess covered her face from the bright light with her hand. Jen extended the earth pass to the barrier and tried to cut it. The hero cut the wall, squeezed through the hole and burst into his city, in the square of which there was a golden figure standing at full height. A cool metropolis opened up to his eyes, bright signs attracted attention, tall buildings, all thanks to magical foundations. Scratching his head, the warrior doubted whether they hit correctly, did not mix up anything, and the territory was occupied. Unexpectedly for the two, there was a loud scream from a girl behind the player. She put her hands to her face and called for help. "There's a pervert here." There was a stomp and 3 people in uniform appeared, law enforcement officers. They ran to Jen. Sarah blocked the player with herself. She had a determined look, clenched teeth, her whole posture showed a readiness to protect. The guards were confused, stopped, the hats flew off their heads, the man began to sweat, and the girls blushed. Sticking out her leg, the demoness amazed everyone and assured that this young man was her fiancé, and no identification would be required. The girl stood up straight, raising her hand to her head. She gave a military salute, thereby confirming that everything was in order. As soon as the guards recognized the lady as a witch, they surrounded her with care and attention, offering her everything from food to rest. While people were currying favor with the demon, Jen did not like this situation. His face darkened. Sarah and Jen watched as people left them back into the city. One of the guards turned and waved goodbye to them. The warrior realized that human hearts were occupied here. The player immediately dressed as a fashionista. As the demoness asked him, smiling radiantly, he beamed with pleasure. He took Sarah's hand tightly. Jen led her to his favorite place to show it. The girl was embarrassed and stumbled from this. The pale moon shines a bright light on a building with many windows. It is a library, an old and majestic building. A bespectacled woman, the library curator, stops our couple as they walk holding hands. The lady, adjusting her glasses, looked at them sternly and demanded a pass to the library. Clinging to the elbow of the embarrassed girl, Jen assured that she was his fiancé and they did not need a pass in order to pass. Having changed her face, the caretaker recognized the demoness, was delighted. She had read about her. Jen turned around and ran. Sarah couldn't keep up with him. The lady asked him to be careful and take his time. The player sits at a large table. Behind him is a shelf with many books. The demoness brings a stack of books, and the warrior studies book after book. Putting her hand under her cheek, Jen reads one of the books and becomes gloomy. Sarah wonders what caused the gloom. In the book that the young man read, there was a comparison between the child of a demon and a human, and it was shown that the demon is always and everywhere stronger than a person. The two of them sat at the table, and in a sad voice Jen said that the library that was built was supposed to serve to unite people. Covering his face with his hands, the warrior was pained by the fact that his people wanted to become demons. Sarah is surprised, because it's not easy to become a demon. The player, thoughtful, said that for this, the Witch of Midnight and her ability to demonize are boring. It dawned on the demoness that she needed this ability in order to return back to the elf. The Witch of Midnight flew on a cloud to her occupied territories, while asking Dana about her mission. The joyful maid appeared on the witch's phone. She tracked the messenger and passed on his photo. Seeing the photo, the girl became embarrassed. Hearts began to fall, and she, in love, wished that he would become her husband. Spreading her arms like wings, Susan flew standing on the balloon towards her dear future hubby. Standing near the urinal, Jen wondered where he could find the Witch of Midnight and how to take away the ability. A scream was heard behind the young man's back and arms slipped past his eyes, hugging him. At this time, Sarah was reading a book. Suddenly she received an order, a skull, and blue smoke flew out. The sparkling skull spoke in the voice of Lithia, asking questions to the demoness. She answered obediently, not understanding what was happening. Lithia was talking on the phone. She was unhappy to learn that Sarah and Jan are in the space of the Midnight Witch. She must save the messenger. The fire flared up behind the Wish Witch, her lips clenched. She longed to see Susan and deal with her. In the ball, Lithia saw the Witch of Midnight sprawled on her Jenna, barely restraining herself. She was smoking with anger. Watching the actions of the witches and the warrior through the orb, the two girls were discouraged by Susan's desire to marry him. Droplets of sweat rolled down from tension. The witches waited for the player's answer, but he, closing his eyes, understood that the offer was tempting, but something stopped him. Sharply opening his eyes, Jen refuses Susan's proposal, declaring that he already has a loved one, without naming who it is. The Midnight Witch looks distracted. She is surprised by the guy's answer. Apparently her data has changed. Quickly getting her bearings, Susan took out a familiar bottle, a love potion, and began to approach Jen. Clutching his cheeks with one hand, the girl poured in a bright liquid with the other hand, which slowly flowed from the bottle. Stretching out her hand, Jen stops Susan, who, frozen, removes her hands, listens to him. Tricky Jen raises her index finger and wishes the witch to pass the potion through a kiss. The witches who watch through the ball are indignant. Sarah is especially angry. Lithia does not recognize her. Her aura darkens. With a sharp movement, Susan covers her mouth with her hand. When she is about to hand him the potion, she swears at her. The witch falls to her knees and wipes the liquid from the corner of her lips with her hand. She liked the rudeness of the warrior. Jen stands in front of the witch, his hands in his pockets. He has figured out the witch. Even if she needs to drink 99 bottles of potions, the effect will be weak. A door appeared, a portal, hundreds of bats flew out of it. They rushed towards Jen and Susan, attacking them. Her Highness walked out of the portal in anger, her eyes glowed with red rage, her entire step carried death. The two rivals stood in front of each other. Lithia jerked her hand and the hem of her cloak began to flow. They had not yet gotten married, but everyone already knew about the messenger. Susan clung to Jen. He was common, she had the right to look after him. The warrior was popular and in demand among witches. The yellow power sparkled in the Midnight Witch. She ends her friendship with Lithia and wants to strike her. Blue and yellow, two forces have come together. Two girls do not take their gaze off. They are ready for much. Only Jen is worried about her city and its restoration after the battle. The player takes a position between the girls, and they scatter in different directions, thereby stopping the battle. He turns his burning gaze to the witches. Since he is a messenger and makes a choice, disappointment shows through in his every action. Jen turns to Lithia. His love for her is eternal. If only they could get married. Susan sticks her tongue out at the witch and pulls the young man towards the exit. The Witch of Desires hits another witch on the forehead with her palm. She falls. Lithia shows herself to be the mistress of the situation and the testing will be in her palace. Lithia walks through her palace, followed by Jen and Susan, who clings to the young man, afraid of the witch. Opening the door, the hostess shows the witch's chambers, but she does not agree. It is creepy and scary here. She wants to live with the messenger. Jen hugs the girls. He is happy. The three of us can sleep together. Susan is happy with this proposal, but Lithia is not. Giving a kick in the ass, the young man flies out of the room like a bullet, with only the witch's leg sticking out of the door. The girl sat on the bed. Lithia folded her arms over her chest. She was going to sit and watch the other witch. Jen, with his head down, walks along the long corridor. He is sad, because there are girls left in the room, and he has to be alone. Entering the room, he sees Sarah sitting on the bed with her hands folded. She praises him. Two witches have already fought because of him. Jen sits down on the bed closer to the girl. She watches him. He sighed, closed his eyes and revealed his dislike for witches. Hugging Sarah, the young man calms her down, despite the fact that now she is a witch and is still dear to his memory as a goddess. The demoness presses herself to the guy's lips in a kiss, causing him to become embarrassed and whiten his eyes. Sarah kisses Jen, going lower to his neck, leaving wet marks. The warrior believes that the girl was not like this before. The demoness leans over the guy. They have the whole night free. Lithia won't be around. Sitting astride Jenna, Sarah answers the call. The Witch of Wishes gives orders to look after the young man all night. The player jumps up and attacks the girl. She only manages to let out a loud scream. The scream attracted Lithia's attention. Sarah lies in Jen's arms, smiles, and deceives the mistress. She just fell. The Witch of Desires is watching Susan. She has a mission. She doesn't know what comes into her head. The Witch of Midnight is immersed in the TV. Sitting on a pillow, the Witch of Midnight had no time for thoughts. With headphones on, a straw with juice in her mouth, she plays a childish game console, commenting on what is happening. Susan is bored playing alone and turns to Lithia and invites her to join her in the game. At this time, Jen gently blows on the demoness' ear. The girl squints and closes her eyes. She pushes the guy a fairly decent distance, so that his head falls back. The elves' ears are quite sensitive. Sarah's loud voice is heard. Having come to their senses, the couple hear the voice of the Witch of Midnight. They are surprised, because Lithia is looking after her. Jen watches Sarah as she jumps up, her cape fluttering as she transforms into an airy creature. Susan runs into the room. The young man has not changed his position. He is still sitting on the bed, but now a butterfly is flying next to him. The girl sees a butterfly. Before Jen's eyes, the Witch of Midnight began to multiply. There were more and more of her in the room. Susan used the water moon illusion ability, which creates countless illusory shadows that behave like real people. Susan is pleased with herself. These are all her clones. Lithia is now playing with one of them. The witch and all her clones raise their hand up and recognize that Jen is not a messenger from the mother goddess, but from the goddesses. All the girls listen to the warrior. Susan can barely restrain herself. Jen gives arguments why he knows all this, because he can use the portal to other worlds. The Witch of Midnight reveals a weapon in her hand, which she points at Jen, considering him a traitor. The incinerating ray flies at the player. He wards off the danger with his hand. he is saved by marriage ties, there will be no threat. Confused, Susan holds the weapon in her hands, steam comes from it, a familiar weapon. The witch waved her hands, the messengers of the goddesses gave her all sorts of toys because they liked her. Now Jen is angry, points her finger at Susan, considers her a traitor. With wide eyes, a drop of sweat running down her face, the witch screams, she likes the culture of another world, she is not a traitor. Jen sits down on the bed, folds his arms, he is surprised by Susan's answer, she likes the earth, she confirms this. The witch sat down on the bed, the warrior listened to her, she liked too many things on earth. Susan opened the bottle, holding the lid from it, she opened her mouth, the player believes that not everything is good on earth, there are warriors there, it is necessary to control the city of Jenna. Memories of everything he saw in the city surfaced, the witch, more than anyone else, longs to be on earth, this cannot be allowed. The witch and other creatures tower over ordinary people who are running away in an attempt to escape, the whole earth is screaming. Susan saw Jen's gaze, which was directed at the vessel in her hands, he was interested in what was there, the drink was cola. Her hand passed a can of Coca-Cola to the warrior, and he joyfully reached out to take it. Jen began to drink a cold drink, and Susan, with her head in her hand, looked at him with a loving gaze. Attracting the player's attention, the Witch of Midnight lifts the hem of her dress, revealing her underwear, seducing him. Apparently some kind of medicine was mixed into the cola. Jen decides to pretend and look at Susan's actions. Suddenly, the player knocks the girl onto the cold sheets and embraces her. Jen saw the girl under him, bare collarbones, the witch unbuttons her buttons on her jacket and in the bodice his gaze stops at the chest. The player tries to touch the witch, but only grabs air. She decides to play with him. Susan asks him to catch up with her. She sits in front of him in a seductive pose, ready to do whatever he wants, but he just needs to catch up with her. The girl has multiplied and now all the clones are called Jenna, find, catch up, get. The player was between two ladies, fell to his knees, exhausted, tired, saliva dripping from his mouth. Susan laughed, twirled a hair on her finger, and looked at Jen. The tired warrior handed the ring to the witch, seething with anger, she towered over the man. Seeing the ring, she began to pull it on her finger, anticipating the power of the mother goddess, pleased and impatient. The ring is on her finger, Susan laughs, spreading her arms, lightning flashes, Jen grins. The girl was flushed, she was in anticipation, she had already planned her life on earth, she was smiling from ear to ear. Susan raises her hands up, rejoices, tears of happiness fall from her eyes, her mouth is twisted in a cry of glee. Approaching the window, the witch is trying to make a portal, Jen watches her with her hand under her head. The witch doesn't succeed, she turns around in anger, starts screaming, and things scattered by the girl fly around. Power sparkles, the witch is sad, her plan has failed, cracks cover her face, her eyes widen. There was a time when people loved her, worshipped her, brought her gifts, their look showed admiration and devotion, asked her on a date, promised her benefits. Susan liked to be the center of attention, she accepted self-care with a slight blush, and every time her heart filled with love. Several fans were ready to attack, with their sleeves rolled up and prepared as they waited. Lithia came out of the smoke, an angry black face, she floated out of the portal, her eyes burned with fire. The creatures, seeing the witch, were precipitated by their desires, blood from their nose flowed down their lips, the thoughts in their heads were different, someone wished. Susan stepped forward of her fans, towards Lithia, an angry scream, clenched fists. But now the Witch of Midnight was chained, the chain shone with blue power, a cry of pain came from the witch's lips, her eyes closed and tears flowed. A warrior in red armor watched the witches, he had a plan to marry the Witch of Midnight. Creatures, people, everyone who worshipped Susan rushed to the attack, balls of power lit up in their hands, some snapped their fingers, some threw their fists, but they were all ready to protect what was dear to them. The witch reached out and released a beam of power, there was a loud explosion, smoke, and then fire. Susan screamed, her fans died, her mouth opened, her eyes widened, her face sank. Lithia stood next to the warrior, they were together, she attacked the Witch of Midnight because of him. The player looked at Susan, who was chained, their eyes locked on each other. In her hands was a glass test tube with a bright red liquid, a sly look, this love potion has been used more than once. At this time, Susan looked at Jen, everything came up in her memory, she remembered that this guy was a warrior in red armor, he had his hands in his pockets, waiting for what would happen next. Holding her head, the witch realized that everything was a deception, and a single tear rolled down from her eye. Opening her eyes, Susan brought down her anger on only one person, turning black, she considered Jen to be guilty. The witch jumped to the warrior, she clutched the spear that appeared tightly, her eyes glowed red, her mouth was open in rage, the guy folded his hands on his chest, calmly waited, he was not afraid. The blade of the spear bounced off the young man without hitting him, the witch swung again, but he was calm. With a smile, Jen moved the tip of the spear away from his face, grinning at Susan and began talking to her. The player used the ability of illusion, like Susan, because now being married they shared the power between themselves. Seeing this, the witch's face darkened, fear began to play in her eyes. It was unexpected for her to see her ability in another. At this time, Lithia flew like a bat to a huge and evil dragon, who, with his paws under his head, was dozing in his monastery. Lithia reincarnated. As soon as the power hovered around her, she turned to the dragon. The dragon raised his head, listened to the girl. The witch waited for an answer with her hands on her sides. Her ass and slender legs were peeking out of the closet. Dressed in a white tight dress, Sarah was looking for something. There was a photo in the frame, torn in half. Hands were stroking the photo. It was Jen, the witch's past. A leg appeared from the portal. Sarah fumbled in the closet. Frightened, she moved her hands, hiding her find. The dragon Lola, in the form of a little girl, stood and waited to be introduced. Covering her mouth with laughter, Sarah choked on it. The little dragon puffed and jumped on the spot so that steam was pouring out of her ears. The girl was unhappy. When Lithia's hand tried to touch Lola, she moved away from her, receiving a lollipop. That was not all. All three stood and looked at each other. The girl with the lollipop, Sarah and Lithia, they shared secrets. A beautiful bright dragon grinned. It was Lola. She told about her removal of powers, how she remained one dragon. Sarah felt sad. She felt sorry for the dragon, because she, too, was Jen's wife and was deceived just like them. They couldn't find him yet, but after a while there would be information. The white round moon illuminates the castle of Lithia. Silence, no wind, nothing prevents the inhabitants from sleeping. At this time, Susan was rubbing her eyes out of resentment, and young men, clones of Jen, stood near her. The warrior spanked the witch, blow after blow, spank after spank. The witch was dark with resentment, so he punished the witch's behavior. Susan cried. Even the mother goddess did not spank her like that. There were a lot of tears. She cried in a puddle lying down. The witch raised her wet face to Jen. He stood, his hands folded on his chest. He looked down at the witch. Suddenly throwing his cloak aside, the player, blacker than a cloud, began to approach the girl. Grabbing Jen under his feet and picking up the flushed witch, he began to walk. The girl had a question in her eyes. The hero throws Susan onto the bed with all his might. He threw her so hard that he knocked the air out of his lungs and moved towards her with determination. Hanging over her, Jen began to threaten her wedding night. The girl opened her eyes in fear. The player's hand slowly moved along the leg in the cut of the witch's dress, collecting the fabric. The hand did not stop. The witch lay with her eyes closed, clenched her fists. Her whole figure was collected. Tears flowed from her eyes without stopping. She was scared. Jen, seeing what was happening to the girl, walked away from her to the window, threw his hands behind his head. Plans changed. The warrior turned sharply to the witch. She wanted to continue. Not at all. He was mistaken. She became angry from his advances. Susan jumped out of bed and ran away from Jen, shouting hurtful words at him as she ran. The young man watched with his hands folded on his chest, loudly slamming the door behind him. The guy looked at the girl leaving and at the closed door, wished her good night and heard the same thing in response. The Witch of Midnight tiptoed to the door of her room, fearing that someone would see and hear her. With a sinking heart, she opened the door and a girl looked in. There was no one in the room. She went inside. A scream escapes from the witch's throat. Behind the door stands a figure in black. Only the eyes of a frozen shadow sparkle red. This was a matriarchal witch, Yana, who truly despises men, but her feminine strength is weakened in comparison to the masculine. Susan looked through the crack. There was no one. She was afraid that her night guest would notice, but it was just a projection. There was no need for fear. Covering herself with her fan, Yana grinned and made fun of the Witch of Midnight, her eyes sparkling above the fan. Fury surrounded Susan with fire. She was angry at the joke of the matriarchy witch. Her smile came out crooked. Praising herself, the witch closed her eyes. She was popular with the messengers, because she is a pretty girl. Slapping her fan on her hand, Yana calmed Susan down and demanded that she obediently wait for news from her. The Witch of Midnight got angry, clenched her fists, screamed at the matriarchal witch, but she, having opened the portal, had already evaporated, leaving only cold air. The angry Susan could not calm down. She kept cursing Yana. Her eyes burned red, and the darkness did not let go. Ding ding ding, the bell on the tower was ringing. Ding ding ding, hurry up, everyone, get ready, it thundered. Warriors in iron armor gathered to save the city, shouted. They found the strength to fight. From the observation tower they watched the invasion of enemies. There were a huge number of them and they all walked forward confident in their victory. A warrior in red armor was flying in the sky on a snow-white dragon. With his hand he pointed the way. The dragon's strong wings evoked power and danger. Long ago, humans and dragons united to defeat a common enemy and an important class. The dragon rider emerged. The squad of guards rejoiced. Their savior had come to them. The captain smiled. Their victory was guaranteed. The warrior and the dragon must incinerate their enemies. For the dragon this is very easy. Going down they rushed to attack. The enemies, seeing that the dragon was flying at them and releasing fire, rushed to run, screaming, and save themselves as best they could. The golden dragons bowed their heads over the gate to the palace of the dragon goddess. A bridge led to the gate. 2. Loli and Jen look into the distance. The warrior asks the dragon to make him rings, but he doubts his request. He is uncomfortable. Bowing his head and closing his eyes, hiding his smile, the dragon will make, of course, from the best materials. Looking at the setting sun, each of them thought about his own, Lola about hope with her lover, Jen about how easy it was to get the ring. The golden dragon, stretching out its ugly head, looked down with its small eyes, its narrow pupils showing anger. Lola was furious. She opened her mouth and a scream came from there. Her violet eyes sparkled. She did not understand why she was forbidden to be with a person. She was confident in him. The majestic dragon threw dangerous words at the girl's back. She couldn't give up her power. She left, having made her choice, large tears falling on her cheeks. The white dragon, curling its tail into a circle, sat and waited for its mate. Looking into the distance, it did not make a sound. It was like stone. Looking out the window, holding onto the white curtain, the sacred servant observed the anger of the children who wanted to see their majesty. A sad girl sat on the throne, lowering her sad eyes downwards. She was thinking about her own things. The very little servant looked at Lola with a loving gaze. She charmed him with her unapproachable beauty and coldness. Having matured, that boy became a man. He did not expect Her Highness to leave them. His eyes called out to her. Emerging from her memories, the little girl lamented that now her lover would not recognize her in such a transformation. Not noticing Susan, Lola ran into her in the hallway, trying to remember who she was. But as soon as the dragon saw her ring on the girl's finger, red with a dragon's head, it shimmered in the light. Pointing her finger at the ring, Lola began to scream, "It is necessary to return her property to her." And who gave it to her? 2 hands grabbed the evil girl's cheeks and began to knead them. Sharp teeth in her mouth, tears from her eyes. That's what Lola looked like. With a sharp movement, the girl escaped from Susan's arms, so that she was surprised by such an impulse. Turning around to run away, she screamed in half a turn. Lola looked carefully at the Witch of Midnight, who she was. She was very interested in listening. Leaning towards Lola, Susan was not going to give up the ring. She didn't want the dragon to become more of a pile of beauty again. Suddenly they were interrupted by sleepy Jen. He was dressed in night pajamas and a nightcap. The girls disturbed his sleep. Susan covered her mouth with her hand and did not allow the young man to utter a word. She did not want him to reveal the secret. Furiously whispering in Jen's ear, Susan did not want publicity about her marriage, to preserve honor at least in front of the child. Lola left, clenching her fist. The girl and the guy looked after her. Stopping the dragon, Jen asked if everything was okay. Lola walked and wondered if there were too many smells of other people around him, and he seemed very familiar. Spreading its wings, the dragon flew out of the window. She flew, catching the air and looking only forward. In the room, Susan shows a video game and is confident that she can defeat Jen. The smile does not leave her face. With her hands folded across her chest, smiling as widely as possible, the girl was confident of her victory. She played this game every day and could not fail. Jen scratches her head, accepts the bet, and confidently walks towards the girl, not hearing her provocation. At this time, Lola peeks through the window. What she sees makes her surprised and open her mouth in amazement. Having flown a short distance from the window, the girl clenches her fists and screams. The man does not know his place. At this time, Lithia was reading and calmly drinking tea. Susan came to see her, and without looking up from her work, the Witch of Desires listened to the information. Opening the door so that it slammed against the wall, Lola hurriedly ran into the room. She was indignant. Sarah finished with the slave traders and now lowered her eyes to the floor. Running to the table, the dragon lowered a sheet of paper with a drawing of a man in front of the witch. She wanted to know who he was. Lithia, resting her cheek with her hand, carefully studied the sheet. Her eyes were looking for something to latch onto, but to no avail. On the sheet there was a drawing of a man. Lola's scribbles depicted red lips that stood out immediately, eyes and blue hair. The drawing was simple and it was not immediately clear who was on it. The girls looked at the sheet. Sarah came up to help figure it out, but she also looked extremely surprised. Grabbing Lola under the arm, the demoness hurried away, otherwise the dragon would betray the man important to her. Carrying out the dragon, the girl went to the exit, but ran into Dana, who was striving for Lithia. The maid ran into the room, almost falling over with a large pile of books. Lithia was waiting for her. She was in a hurry to deliver it. All the books were placed on the table. Lithia grabbed the book of the Guru of Love and began to read with concentration. Sarah and Lola were walking along the corridor. They were having a leisurely conversation. The demon was telling the dragon about Jenna, and the reasons why she shouldn't give him away. Many girls, namely witches, destroyed the world. The former goddess spoke and spoke. They cannot bear responsibility anymore. Witches destroy everything. They are created for this. Lola stopped, forcing Sarah to turn around, assuring that it was necessary to protect, and no one would take this away from them, it was their duty. The dragon left in thought. She had a plan for the next steps. She left Jenna with Sarah, and she had other things to do and had no time to deal with them. The hero was having fun with all his might. He did not lose his smile and was happy. He was holding playing cards in his hand. Half-naked Susan looked pitiful. She was wearing only a peignoir, and she was also holding cards with a trembling hand. Putting his hand to his side, Jen laughed at the witch, let the wife give up, screaming. She did not want to listen. Collecting her anger, she threw out the card. This blow should defeat everyone. Her eyes turned red, power curled in the air. The three-headed dog fusion card flew out and rushed attacking Jen. The witch rejoiced, she succeeded. But the warrior used a special move, the Hand of God, so he showed that Susan did not need to rely too much on her cards. Several cards, on them there are different images of dark force, chained in chains. These chains break, the force breaks out. The air blows towards Susan, her cards explode in front of her, fire is everywhere, she stands and watches, her last clothes fluttering from the explosion. Falling to her knees, the girl is unable to get up, the cards are on the floor, she lost. Jen is waiting for her to come to her senses. Squatting down next to her, the player jokes about the last thing on her, he won't lay a finger on her. The witch screams, she's not ready for this. Standing up, the girl pulls her hand, where the ring is, she wants to take it off and return it to Jen. She doesn't need such a marriage, but the ring does not come off. Calling on her strength, her innate skill, she is imprisoned in a circle, lightning flashes, the warrior is terrified. She reaches out her hand to try to stop her, but the witch can no longer control herself, she needs to remove the ring with all her might. After a few seconds, the smoke slowly dissipates, the girl is left completely naked, her eyes widen, realization comes, she covers herself with her hands. In the corridor, meanwhile, Sarah hears the loud cry of the midnight witch, she is interested, she turns towards the sound. Jen hands Susan a cloak, she sits closed on her haunches, the guy is also uncomfortable, he didn't expect the call to work like that. Snatching the cloak from Jen's hands, the witch screams at him, takes away her balls of mucus as the hero called them, he understands what it is. Having intercepted Susan, the warrior tries to convince her to get dressed, otherwise people will misunderstand, she screams and breaks away, tears flowing from her eyes. Suddenly the door opens and Sarah appears in front of them, she is struck by the picture, two alone and a naked witch, questions began to play on her face. She is amazed, her eyes do not want to see this picture, her lips are compressed, she has already imagined what they are doing. A few moments later, a heart-rending scream comes from her throat, her eyes flash with anger. Her power is electrified, she is furious. Seething with anger, she slowly approaches the couple. Susan clutches Jen's cloak tighter, and he waves his hands and tries to convince him of the misunderstanding. The embarrassed witch of midnight tries to justify herself, but it doesn't work out well for her, she snaps at the man who stood up for her. Taking a pose with her hands on her hips, Susan reprimands the young man and considers him to be to blame, he won't get away with it so easily. The evil witch of midnight walks out the door, leaving Sarah and Jen alone. The demoness follows the girl with her eyes. Having darkened her face, the witch does not want to be a third wheel, the former goddess is closely watching her. Jen is confused, he didn't want to offend Susan, and follows her with a long, hard look. Sarah turns around and goes to the bed, the warrior does not understand what the girl is doing, he spreads his arms and looks, she does not want to chat. Sitting down on the bed, she knocks on it and invites the player to join her. Jen walks along laughing, rubbing his hand, he goes in a hurry, the girl is waiting for him, arms folded on her chest. The young man did not dare, he lightly touches the demoness' shoulders, gently begins to massage, caress her, but she is upset. Jen was sweaty, he only got the achievement in the game, and now he can't answer the demoness' question. The index finger is aimed at the player, the witch is angry, she saw through him, he tried to lie to her. His face darkens, he cannot find the right words, beads of sweat run down his cheek. Here he is sitting at the computer in his room, his hands on the keyboard, he spent days and nights to win the witches, many followed his example and also won the hearts of the goddesses. This guy is a slimy bug, once he got into the game he realized it, he screamed, his mouth became horribly distorted. Sitting, turned away from each other, looking away to the side, the goddesses discussed the division of his body. Sharply grabbing Jen's face with his hands so that he squeezed his cheeks, a blush covered him, he learned that Sarah was different. The demoness pressed him tightly to her luxurious chest, squeezing him in so much that it became difficult for the young man to breathe. She dreamily put her hand to her cheek, thinking about the names of her and Jen's children, and he was choking and trying to escape from her embrace. Finally he succeeded, he gasped greedily for air, Sarah released him, so that his head fell back. After all, Jen gently pressed Sarah to his chest, buried his head in her head, and closed his eyes. Clutching the fabric of his jacket, the former goddess clung to him, unable to hold back tears of tenderness. The demoness was leaving, but looked back, holding onto the doorframe. Her gaze showed great love for this young man. There was a magical fruit in his hand, it glowed and even shimmered, and a branch grew from it. At this time, Susan trained fiercely in order to defeat the warrior next time, leaving him no chance. Screaming furiously and loudly, she continually tried to improve her skill in the game. At this time, leafing through a book, the girl was sitting in bed, wearing a beautiful nightie, so that her young breasts were visible. Wearing glasses, Lithia read the Guru of Love, without stopping and marveling at how skillfully it was written, how much information there was. That night everyone was busy with their own affairs.